A gute Woche. The Rebbe Zilgezinsen began the Farbrengen this afternoon that this is the Shabbos which comes right after Pesach, and the Shabbos which comes right after Pesach is also always the Shabbos when we bench the month of Iyar. But negay the Shabbos coming right after Pesach, it means that being that Pesach was this week, as stressed many times in Hasidus, that Shabbos elevates the entire week. And therefore, all the inyanim that have transpired throughout the week have their aliyah, have their spiritual elevation in Shabbos. All inyanim in all different categories, in machshava, dibur, and maaseh, are all elevated on Shabbos. So therefore, the vayechulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz of this Shabbos is elevating the days of Pesach as well. And this is the Shabbos when we are benching the month of Iyar. Bichlal, the names of the Hebrew months, Chazal tell us, Shmois HaChadoshim Olu Imohem MiBavel. The names were adopted when the Yidden were in Bavel. And therefore we find a name referring to the month of Iyar. Chazal tell us, quoting from Psukim in Tanakh, the month of Iyar is referred to as the month of Ziv, Chodesh Ziv. And Chazal comment, why is this month called Ziv? Sheboi Noildu, the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah, that Sheboi Noildu Ziv Sonei Olam. It's a month of Lichtigkeit, because the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were born in this month. And therefore Chazal referred to this month Chodesh Ziv, a month of Lichtigkeit. However, there's something extremely special in the month of Iyar, which we do not have in any month. And this is the fact that every single day of the month we fulfill a mitzvah. There's a special mitzvah. In the month of Nisan, we do not do it for the entire month. We only start the latter part of the month, Mimachas HaShabbos, from the second day of Pesach. In the month of Sivan, we only do it for a few days. However, in the month of Iyar, we count the Sviras HaOmer each and every single day of the month. And this shows us something very special to the month, the fact that every single day we are mekayim a mitzvah. And the whole idea of Sviras HaOmer, as the Ran tells us, is a preparation to Matan Torah. On one hand was Yitzias Mitzrayim. How were the Yidden able to reach to such a high spiritual elevation from them going out of Mitzrayim to Matan Torah? So there was the month of Iyar in the middle. And this month of Iyar was the month of preparation for Kabbalah HaTorah. And the preparation was through Sviras HaOmer, because the idea of Sviras HaOmer was the fact that they were counting the days, meaning we're a day closer to Matan Torah, another day closer to Matan Torah, a third day closer, and so forth. Based on this, the Rebbe Zilgezinsen asked, if the original source of Sviras HaOmer is that the Yidden were counting the days, that the days have passed, for Sviras, another day has passed, and we're closer to Sviras HaOmer, then the count, closer to Matan Torah, thank you, then the counting should have been the opposite. Why start Hayim Yom Echad Lo'imer, Hayim Yom Sheni Lo'imer, and so forth? They should have counted, we have 49 days left to Matan Torah, we have 48 days to Matan Torah, and so forth, until we have only one more day left to Matan Torah. Based on what Chassidus explains, Zacharti, on the pasuk Zacharti loch chesed nu'urayich, the Rebbe says he remembers the kindness, the chesed which Yidden did as soon as they were born as a nation, which this was right away by Yitzias Mitzrayim. That was the birth of Klal Yisrael, of Am Yisrael, as an Am Yisrael. And right there and then, when the Yidden expressed their willingness to join with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking them out of Mitzrayim and going ahead to give the Torah, Rebbe says here something tremendous was accomplished, that the Yidden, not only are they the recipients of the Torah, but they became partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the giving of the Torah. They elevated themselves to such a high level that they were able to become full shutfim with the Rabbeinu Shalom, a full partner as far as the level of Neisen HaTorah as well. And therefore, that is why the counting begins, Hayim Yom Echad Lo'ima, because actually there is an inyan which began right away then on Pesach. And that's why the counting goes in the sequence of from 1 until reaching till 49, because the inyan of Yidden becoming partners in the Sinas HaTorah began as soon as the Yidden left Mitzrayim. So, we are actually benching this month of Iyar, which is this very special month, and as all in Yonim in Torah, it also requires a hira, a lesson what we are to derive from this. A little bit stressed, we find in Aramaic, Torah is referred to as Oiraisa. Oiraisa means Torah. Oiraisa is composed of two words. Oir, Yesa. It means Torah brings light. The whole idea of Torah is that Torah brings lichtigkeit. Torah brings a spiritual life to a Yid in everything that he does. There is no matter what a Yid should be involved in, and Torah shouldn't give him guidance how he should act in this specific matter. One is obligated to say that the world was created because of him. The world in itself is an inyan of helam, cover up on getlichkeit, cover up on the lakus. What is the tafkid of a yid? The tafkid of a yid is to take this oir ha-Torah, which this is oiraiso, oir yesei, to bring Torah and to baleicht and to bring lichtigkeit into this helem which is existing in the world. In the black, where getlichkeit is not seen and lakus is not seen, this is the whole idea of creation of a yid. Oilam is a helem, and to bring the getlichkeit and the lichtigkeit which Torah carries within itself, to bring this to each and every spot and corner of the world. Which this is the idea and the message of Bichlal of Torah, and specifically when we're talking about this month of Iyar, which comes as a hachana, as a preparation to Matan Torah. And it's such a special month where every day has this special significance of having a mitzvah which we are to fulfill each and every day. This has been Igei, the month of Iyar in general. A little more specific, a step further in Iyar, it's brought in Siddur HaArizal that Iyar is an abbreviation of Ani Hashem Reifecha. The Rebishter is the one who heals us, cures us. Pasuk in Beshalach. Ani Hashem Reifecha. So the Rebbe raised the question that we know when we compose an abbreviation, we usually compose the first letter of every word. The Aleph for Ani, Hashem is usually one Yud. And Iyar, in all legal documents, and Al-Pi Torah and Al-Pi Halacha, is spelled Iyar with double Yud. Why is it that Iyar is spelled with two Yuds? At the time it abbreviates Ani, Hashem, and the Reifecha, which stands for the Reish, but should have been only one Yud if this is a Rosh Tevis of Ani, Hashem, Reifecha. And here the Rebbe Zalzunzan explained that Bichlal we know we refer to the Rabbeinu Shalom with two names. There's the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and there's another Shem, the Shem of Adnai. Chazal tell us that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Adam Arishon, and it was his first day of creation, and Adam found the suitable names how everything in the world should be referred to, it came, Rabbeinu Shalom asked, what should his name be? So Adam Arishon responded, L'cho yois likoi Adnai. It is suitable for the Rabbeinu Shalom to refer him with the Shem of Adnai. So we see that there's the Shem of Adnai, and we also see that there's the Shem of Yud Kei Vav Kei. And both Shemis really go together. When we have Iyar as a Rosh Tevis of Ani Hashem Reifecha, it's with two Yuds. The first Yud is from the beginning of Adnai, from Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the second Yud in the word Iyar is the last letter in the Shem of Adnai. The last letter, and Adnai is a Yud. The Rebbe says this is what it originated or the Minig Yisrael, wherever we find in Sidurim and other places, where we refer to the Shem Hashem, and the Shem Hashem is printed with 2 Yuds. What is the shaykhs of 2 Yuds to the Shem Hashem? Now this is what it means. The 2 Yuds compose the Shem Hashem, for 1 Yud, the beginning of Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the second Yud is the last letter of the Shem Adonai. Getting back to Iyar as the month of Ani Hashem Reifecha, by the Rabbeinu Shalom we find there are 2 ways of curing. One way the Rabbeinu Shalom cures, if a person is ill, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cures him. However, there is a higher level, a preventive way. As we just read, as the Pasuk says, Kol HaMachla, we read it in Shvi Shel Pesach, Kol HaMachla Shasamti B'Mitzrayim Lo Yosim Alecha. The Rebbe says he wouldn't bring any machlas which he plagued the Mitzrim, Ki Ani Hashem Reifecha. He wouldn't bring none of those sicknesses on us. Ki Ani Hashem Reifecha. Being that Chazal derive Mikan Shenitna Reshus LaReife LaRapes, based on the pasuk V'Rape Yerape, Chazal derive that the Torah has given permission that a doctor should also be able to cure a person. The same thing we find when a physician heals a person. There is also 2 ways of healing. There is one way when a person isn't feeling well and has to come on to a doctor, the doctor should heal him. The doctor who is doing this Bishli Chusay, as an emissary of the Reifei Chalbasa, of the overall healer and cure of the Rabbeinu Shalom. And there is another way where a doctor cures in a form of preventive medicine, seeing that a particular person should not become sick in any way. And this is why we find even Begashmias, when it begins the month of Iyar, the weathers usually change and becomes a much better weather, which is also a weather which is much more suitable and easier for people to maintain and keep up their health as the weather begins in the month of Iyar. The same we find when a doctor is curing an individual. It also has to be in a way, just like the month of Iyar comes after Nisan. Nisan is the inyan of Yitzias Mitzrayim. After we pass Yitzias Mitzrayim, comes Iyar Ani Hashem Reifecha. Yitzias Mitzrayim, in spiritual sense, as it's explained in Chassidus, is one going out of his limitation, out of his boundaries, out of his own limitations. Just like we see, Begashmi is the same. When a doctor wants to cure properly a person, it also has to be that the doctor has to put away all the side motives and any type of motivation or interest or personal interest which he has to lift himself up beyond all these type of limitations, and that is when he can dedicate himself to properly cure the patient. Which this has been a gay the month of Iyar. Shabbos Mevorchem Iyar must always be the Shabbos after Pesach. However, it must not always be Parshas Kedoshim. This year it came out to be Parshas Kedoshim. However, in other years, last year or next year, it is in different sedras. It wasn't a different sedra, and next year it will be in a different sedra. But Negei Parshas Kedoshim, which is the sedra which we read this morning, is the Torah tells us Kedoshim to you, that a Yid is obligated to be holy. There's a special holiness, a special Kedusha, which the Rebbe put into Klal Yisrael. And Rashi immediately comments, Kedoshim to you, Rashi comments, Prushim, that the Yidden are supposed to be separated. In other words, Ata v'chartonu mikol ha'amim. This is actually what Rashi means. Yidden are selected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's special nation. However, we are not equal to all other nations. At the same time, just like we say in davening, we are taka v'chartonu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen us, and at the same time, v'roimamtonu mikol loshain. At the same time, it is the Rabbeinu Shalom who has elevated us higher than any other nation. And we are told that we are taka in this world, and simultaneously, while being in the world, we have to feel in a way of prushim to you. We have to be separated and higher from the rest of the world. And by doing this, here the Rebbe referred to what he spoke at length, Achishel Pesach, that it is the obligation of each and every Yid, as the Rambam paskins, to see, to utilize and spread his influence, not only on Yidden, but on Goyim as well, to see to it that Goyim live up to and fulfill their obligation, which is the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, and definitely to utilize our hashpah, which each and every one was given, to have a hashpah on each and every Yid, to see to it that every Yid should live up to this standard of Kedoshim Tiyu, of the Kedusha, the special Heiligkeit, the special Kedusha which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given into Klal Yisrael. Another special inyan which we have on this Shabbos is the fact that today is 26 days in the month of Nisan. And if we want to find the specialty of 26 days in the month of Nisan, it can be found in Masechtas Tainis. Today is the Yortzeit of Yeshua ben Nun. And as the Alter Rebbe tells us the greatness of Yom HaYortzeit, that is the day that Kol HaMolei Asher Omla, Nafshay, all the work and labor and tremendous effort which a person has achieved throughout his life gets a spiritual elevation on this day of his Yortzeit. And we're talking here on the Yortzeit of Yeshua ben Nun. What is the specialty of Yeshua ben Nun? Yeshua was the devoted disciple to Moshe Rabbeinu. The pasuk tells us, Yeshua ben Nun na lo yomish mitoich ha'oil. He never left Moshe Rabbeinu. Truthfully, each and every one of us is a disciple of Moshe Rabbeinu. As we say, as the Torah tells us, the pasuk in Torah Shebeksav, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, me'irasha kehilas Yaakov. Each and every Yid has inherited from whom? From Moshe Rabbeinu. So this is it. In other words, today's day is the day which brings out the shayches from each and every Yid to Moshe Rabbeinu, because just like Yeshua spells out in a very strong way his dedication to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, however, taught to every Yid as well, and every Yid has a shayches to Moshe Rabbeinu as we express ourselves. Torah tziva lanu Moshe me'irasha kehilas Yaakov. Here the Rebbe spoke behemshech to, the Rebbe spoke at length in Achishel Pesach Dike Farbrengen, whereby the Rebbe introduced the idea of learning Rambam, the great importance that each and every one, every Yid, should get involved in learning the Sefer the Rambam, and we're talking about the Yad HaChazaka, which is the Sefer, Mishnah Torah, Yad HaChazaka, which this is the Sefer which was written by the Rambam himself. In this clear, spelled out, very explaining and very clear explanation, which is the Rambam's words, the other Sfarim which were written by the Rambam, which we have, or the Rambam wrote them in Arabic and they were translated into Hebrew. However, it is the Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah, which this is written by the Rambam himself, and it's written in an extremely, as the Rebbe kept on referring to, a Loshen Tzacha, a very clear and understandable language, is how the Rambam put the Sefer of Yad HaChazaka. And the Rebbe suggested and asked that it would be very appropriate for us to get involved in learning the Yad HaChazaka of the Rambam. And in today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe gave several reasons why he's requesting this. First of all, the Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe tells us in Hilchas Talmud Torah at length that each and every one of us is obligated to learn and be knowledgeable in all of the mitzvahs of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Where do we have a sefer which tells us so clearly and explains so well each one of the Tayyag mitzvahs? Whether they are mitzvahs that are negei bizman hazeh or they are not negei bizman hazeh. This is the Rambam. In the Rambam we get a clear and detailed explanation benegei all of the mitzvahs. The proper way how the Rebbe wants the Rambam should be learned is the Rambam's birthday is Erev Pesach. Rambam was born Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Therefore, the Rebbe says it would be extremely appropriate to be able to complete the Rambam by next Erev Pesach. In order for us to be able to learn the Rambam on a daily basis and complete by next year Erev Pesach, it is necessary to learn 3 prakim of the Rambam daily. In fact, Friday there was a Meir Shir already printed, like similar to the Meir Shir which we have for the Shiurim of Tanya. Meir Shir for the first few weeks is hanging on the wall of 770. To begin tomorrow, Chav Zayin Nissen, to begin learning the Hakdam of the Rambam. And afterwards, the Meir Shir shows us how we are to learn 3 prakim in the Rambam daily. Rebbe expressed himself today, perhaps lav kol moicha savilda. Maybe not everyone is capable of learning 3 prakim in the Rambam daily. Therefore, the Rebbe suggested we should learn, for those that cannot learn 3 prakim daily, to learn 1 perik every day, and thereby we will finish the Rambam after 3 years. And the emes is, we find the Rambam tells us, b'negei reading of the Torah, that there are also two ways of doing it. There's the way of doing it how we do it, where we complete the Torah each and every year, Chamisha Torah. The Rambam tells us, though, that there were some communities which did not read a complete Sedra every week. They read less, and thereby they finished the Torah once in 3 years. So based on what the Rambam himself tells us, B'negei Torah, we can adopt the same thing, B'negei learning of the Rambam. Another inyan which this learning of Rambam will accomplish, it will bring to a tremendous unity and Avas Yisrael, and Achdus Yisrael amongst all of the participants in the Shiurim. Because all the people who will be learning Rambam will be learning the same halachas on every single day. In other words, every day the same people will be learning the same halachas. Tomorrow we'll be learning different halachas. Again, all of us learning the same halachas. So this will bring to a tremendous Avas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, a unity amongst all the participants in this inyan. Furthermore, being that the reason for us being in Golus and Churb Habayis is because of Sinas Chinam, we have to look for means and vehicles that will bring to Avas Chinam, that will bring to a correct the Sinas Chinam which prevailed then, and bring to an Avas Chinam, to a tremendous love amongst each and every Yid. And being that we want to leave Golus, and this Golus affects everyone, men, women, and children, adults, and youngsters as well. We have to find a way how this learning of Rambam should involve everyone as well. Rebbe says, we find in Chazal that there is categories. Once a child reaches 10, ben Esel, le Mishnah, ben Chamesh Esrei, le Gemara. So it's hard to say that we should expect from a young child or a teenager who has just began learning Gemara that he should be able to learn Rambam on a continuity basis. He's 15 years old and just began learning Gemara. Or he's 10 years old and just began learning Mishnah. Though the Rambam is extremely organized and explains himself very well and explains everything in detail, however, it is still a little bit hard to say that youngsters will be able to go along and learn Rambam on such and understand and be familiar with what they're learning. Therefore, the Rebbe has an additional suggestion. The Rambam also wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs. The Sefer HaMitzvahs was written by the Rambam in Arabic. However, Reb Shmuel Even Tovin was the one who translated it into Hebrew, and as the Rambam himself writes, that it is a reliable and authentic translation. In the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam gives a detail on each and every mitzvah of the Taryag mitzvahs. Therefore, the Rebbe is suggesting, those that cannot keep up to learn the Perek Rambam on a daily basis, they should at least learn the quotation of the Sefer HaMitzvahs that deals with that mitzvah that is being studied in the Rambam on that day. And this, the Rebbe says, applies not only to children, it applies to women as well. First of all, there are minyanim in Torah which women are familiar with. There are halachas which they are supposed to fulfill. Even Benegea Karbanis, we know that children participated in Karbanis. Women had their Karbanis which they were mechuyev to bring. Say in davening that the women, wives of the Koyanim, daughters of the Koyanim, were able to eat the Karbanis. Koyanim, l'nshayim, l'vneim, l'avdeim, as we say. So therefore, even in Yonam of Karbanis, which are not mitzvahs that are noyeg b'zman hazeh, we find how women have a shaychus to that. And especially, we are all constantly hoping, as we recite daily in our davening, we are hoping for the coming of Mashiach and for the building of the Beis HaMikdash, whereby we will have to be familiarized in all of these inyanim again. So therefore, the learning of the inyanim that have a shaychus to Beis HaMikdash is also of extreme importance. To explain how the Rambam dedicated himself to the chibur of the Yad HaChazaka, Rebbe said we find in Chazal, based on the pasuk of Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, the Gemara tells us that Anoichi is an abbreviation, Ano Nafshi Ksavis Yehovis, which means that the Rabbeinu Shloim has given himself away totally and written himself into Torah. Rebbe says, why is there a need for the Nafshi? It could have been Ano Ksavis Yehovis. The Rebbe says he wrote himself into Torah and gave the Torah. So we see that Chazal stressed the Rebbe to put his soul kaviyachol into Torah as well. Tzadikim daimim l'bayram. Tzadikim are compared to their master, to their creator, to the Rabbeinu Shalom. And therefore the Rambam has put himself in a format of Anon, Nafshi, Ksavis, Yehavis, into the writing of this Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah which the Rambam wrote. And therefore everything in the Rambam is extremely accurate. Rambam writes at the very end of the Sefer that the Sefer is composed of Pei Gimel. There are 83 various halachas which are discussed in the Yad HaChazaka. And the Rambam writes in the beginning of his Sefer, in his introduction, that he's naming his Sefer Mishnah Torah, because this is where he's really spelling out all the inyanim of Torah in precise detail. In other words, the Rambam did it with the intention that a person should be able to learn Chumash, be well versed in Chumash, and afterwards he will learn Rambam. He will have a clear knowledge of all of the Taryag mitzvahs HaTorah. In fact, when we open the Rambam, the very beginning of the Rambam, before the Hakdameh, the Rambam quotes a pasuk. What's the pasuk? Oz lei eivosh, I will not be embarrassed. V'habiti al kol mitzvaysecha, when I will look at all your mitzvahs. Rebbe says, the Rambam at the very end of his chibur concludes, Brich Rachmana Disayon. He's thanking the Rabbeinu Shalom for completing this chibur. In many prints of the Rambam we find, there's an expression like of a Baruch Hashem, where the Rambam how he begins his chibur. What shaychus does this pasuk have to the introduction of the Rambam? The Rebbe says it's a very fine pasuk. But what shaychus does it have? Ozlei Eivosh, I will not be embarrassed, V'habiti al kol mitzvaysecha, when I will look through all your mitzvahs. Rabbi explained, actually the question arises, how could the Rambam go ahead and say that he's writing a chibur, that by people learning his chibur, they will not have to come on to any other svarim, and they will have a clear knowledge in all the mitzvahs if they will learn his sefer. Now, how is this go hand in hand with the midah of anava, of modesty, which is required from a person? And here the Rambam says that for this reason he's referring to the Sefer, he's entitling the Sefer Mishnah Torah, because it is a Mishnah to Torah. And in other words, if a Yid will learn Chamisha Chumsha Torah and a Yid will learn Rambam, will have a complete understanding on all the mitzvahs. That is why the Rambam is beginning with this pasuk. Rambam says, "V'habiti al kol mitzvaysecha." If one wants to look through all mitzvahs and have a real, proper knowledge of all the mitzvahs, we know there is Torah and there is mitzvahs. Okay, Torah, we know how lekoy dvara keish. Chazal tell us divrei Torah ina mekablam tumah. Torah always remains pure. No matter in what situation a person is, even the learner of Torah, the one who is learning Torah, is tamei. However, Torah always remains pure. The Rambam himself writes, in the Shalos Tshuvos of the Rambam writes that Miyomai, in all of his life, he never learned Torah when he had to go to mikveh. If he had to go to mikveh, Tfilas Keri, the Rambam writes, he was careful with it. However, Mi'ikar Adin, Torah eina mekabelas Tumah. Mitzvahs we find, mitzvah has to be done. Many times we have to come on to another object to do the mitzvah, to another person to fulfill a mitzvah. We cannot fulfill mitzvahs at tzedakah if there's no one whom to give tzedakah to. We find general differences between Torah and mitzvahs. However, the Rambam says, "B'habiti el kol mitzvah." If one wants to be able to look through all your mitzvahs and be well versed in all the mitzvahs, the Rambam said, I put my embarrassment on the side, put all kinds of calculations, whether it's an inyan of another or it's not an inyan of another, put all this aside. Don't be embarrassed. Because by this chibur, I'm going to bring to it that Yidden will be able to look into and be well versed and well familiar in all the mitzvahs of Hashem. And the Rambam gives every mitzvah in complete details. The Rambam broke it up into prokim, and before every perik he tells us, before every halach he tells us exactly how many mitzvahs are involved. The emphasis, the Rebbe says, that the Rambam wrote 3 mahadoros, 3 editions, till he reached the final edition of the Rambam. And that is why we find many manuscripts where there are different halachas in the Rambam that may have a different number of prokim as we have in our edition of the Rambam. Or may have different numbers of halachas. Why is this? It originated because there were various editions until we came to the final edition of the Rambam. So maybe in the first edition or in the second edition, this specific halacha may have had a few prokim more or a few prokim less. And it was later when the Rambam amended it to what it is now. We even have various manuscripts which are around today, which were copies of the Rambam, handwritten copies of the Rambam. However, they had the Rambam's approval, the Rambam's signature on them. The Rambam signed that they're accurate. And even in those manuscripts, the Rebbe says, we find minor differences from the Rambam there as the Rambam we have now. The fact that the Rambam himself initialed it, so to speak, and said that it's put a signature on it and said that it's accurate, this, the Rebbe says, has no bearing for the minor errors that are there. Because we find in halacha the same minyan. For example, if there's a question of a shtar, there's a document which was approved by Bezdin. Though we find minor little things that are wrong with the document, the explanation is that what Bezdin really stamped and notarized this document for, as the expression goes, amonish b'shtar, on the main inyan which is discussed in the document. Same, the Rambam was concerned that halacha should be copied over correctly. The fact that there were misspellings or broken up in an additional halacha or halacha less or halacha more, these are minor things which the Rambam did not pay attention to when he reviewed the copies of his own chibah, which were handwritten in those days by his disciples and by the people around him. But again, the seif of the Rambam, how we have it, is an extreme accuracy, and everything is written b'lashon tzacha, written extremely clear and extremely explained to the detail, explained everything very precisely, everything by the Rambam himself. The Rebbe says, we cannot learn Rambam like we learn the Shas or Mishnayos, it is known by people that what we do is we make a chalukah, like a chalukah sashas, and one takes one mesechta, another one takes another mesechta, and so forth. And perhaps let us do with the Rambam the same. One will learn first few halachas, somebody else will learn a few halachas later, and in such a way we will conclude the Rambam. Rebbe says this cannot be done in the Rambam, because in the Rambam we cannot have a proper understanding of the Rambam unless we learn it in the order as the Rambam set up his chibur. In other words, if one will start learning later prakim and will not learn earlier prakim, he will be lacking something. And there may be certain inyanim which are explained or once we have learned it, we have a self-explanation on these inyanim, because we learned the earlier prakim in the Rambam, and later, when it comes to the later prakim, we will be missing it if we did not learn the earlier prakim. Therefore, Rambam is a sefer which has to be learned ala seder. So we cannot do here what we do with Shas or we do with Mishnayos. Mishnah is different. Chazal tell us, ein seder, amongst two mesechtas, there's no union of seder. So if a person gets involved in learning a mesechta, he'll learn this mesechta well and he'll know it. The fact that he did not learn another mesechta, or whether it is an earlier mesechta or a later mesechta, has no bearing. However, by the Rambam it is not so. By the Rambam, the mesechta, the Yad HaChazaka has to be learned in a way from the beginning to the end. In fact, the Rebbe says there are many editions of the Rambam. Rambam referred to his sefer as the Yad HaChazaka. Mishnah Torah and Yad HaChazaka. So there are many editions of the Rambam where there's a pasuk added on Hayad HaGdoila v'HaChazaka asher asa Hashem l'Moshe. Maybe I'm quoting the pasuk wrong, but anyways, the idea is that tying in the Yad HaChazaka of the Rambam to the Yad HaChazaka of Moshe Rabbeinu, mi Moshe ad Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe ben Maimon, because this is the Mishnah Torah which was given to us through Moshe Rabbeinu. Pirkei Avos, as it is customary in the weeks from after Pesach, we begin reciting Pirkei Avos every Shabbos after Mincha, as well as a Zohar in this week's Sedra with the commentary of the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. Benegei the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, thank you. Mishnah begins, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received Torah from Sinai. U'mesara li Yeshua. It's related the Torah to Yeshua. So forth. The Maimah which the Rebbe Zilgazunzain said today was also based on the Mishnah of Moshe kibel Torah. And a few of the questions were the same. Main question is, why does the Mishnah stress Moshe received Torah from Sinai? Why doesn't the Mishnah say that Moshe received Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Very obvious question. Moshe was the one that received the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is there a need to stress Sinai? Obviously, most Mefarshim stress that our approach to Torah has to be just like Sinai. We know there were many huge mountains where HaKadosh Baruch Hu refused to give the Torah on these huge mountains. However, he said he will give it on Sinai, the Nomich Mikol Turaya, which is the lowest of all the mountains. Same in the spiritual sense. We approach Torah, we have to approach Torah with a sense of modesty, with a sense of anova. First of all, the Rebbe says, even the Balagaiva are also obligated to learn Torah. So Mishnah begins with a major system. How Torah was revealed from Moshe to Yeshua to Zekanim and so forth. Why get involved here with a heroah which reflects modesty? Let us, Torah is an union of Chachma v'Seichel. The first instruction here should have been, Yagaito Matzasa. You want to learn Torah, you have to work hard on it. You learn hard Torah, you'll know. Or other types of similar instructions which are negeya to the understanding of the Chachma v'Seichel of Torah. I think it was here the Farbrengen where the Rebbe explained how Moshe was the honor of Mikol Adam Ashal Pnei Adama. Moshe was reflected the highest level of modesty which can exist in the world. So it is explained in Chassidus, what's the pshat? Moshe was well aware of his qualifications. Moshe was well aware that he was the one who HaKadosh Baruch Hu was chosen. Torah tziva lanu Moshe merasha kilas Yaakov. So what's the pshat? Moshe was an honor. What do you mean Moshe was an honor? He kept himself that he considered himself not Moshe Rabbeinu. So Chassidus explains, Moshe was well aware of the qualifications that he possessed. However, Moshe claimed, would HaKadosh Baruch Hu give this same gift of such qualifications to somebody else, then the somebody else would have lived up to a much higher spiritual level than he did. Moshe knew well that this was a tremendous gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen him to be the Moshe Rabbeinu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has presented him with such tremendous koiches. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu looked upon himself. He did not feel that he lived up to the standards of what a Moshe Rabbeinu should. And therefore, when Moshe had the problem with Korach, the Rebbe says, Korach was a well-learned person. Korach wasn't Stamei. Korach was a Rosh Yeshiva. And together with him, he had 250 other people who fit into the category of Rosh Yeshiva. They were also learned people. And when they came complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, we find Moshe Rabbeinu did not get involved conversing with them too much. What did Moshe Rabbeinu tell them? Boker v'yoda Hashem. It'll come morning, and it'll be proven who is right. Same the Rebbe says we find in Chazal also. Shosak Rav. When Rav, Amira Rav, was asked questions on halacha, Rav did not respond. Shosak Rav. However, this does not mean that the Rav gave in to the questions which he was asked. In fact, we find in halacha situations where other Amoraim asked questions to Rav. Rav did not answer them, and at the same time, the halacha is like Rav. What does this mean? It means that Rav lifted himself up higher. In other words, it comes a time when we cannot get involved into a dialogue, into answering. And the same thing, Shosak Rav. But this does not mean that Rav gave in. The same Moshe Rabbeinu, when Korach v'chol Adosai, he did not get involved in a too much detailed dialogue with him. What Moshe Rabbeinu said, what has he responded? Boker v'yoda Hashem. Back here to the Mishnah, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Rebbe says, who is Mishnah addressing itself to? Mishnah here is concluding, Hey mamru shloisha dvarim, have a mesunim badin, hemidu talmidam harbe, v'asus yog la-Torah. So who is the Mishnah really talking to? The Mishnah is talking to Dayanim, to great people, to great sages. And these great sages are getting instructions how they should act. They have to create many Talmidim, asus yog la-Torah. These are instructions which are given to real great people. There's a pasuk in Tehillim, Lama taratztun horim gavnunim. Why are you quarreling large mountains, huge mountains? Hahara shechamad elakim l'shiftoi, which is the mountain which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen to rest upon. This is the Har Sinai. No. Anyways, so the Mishnah here is telling us what has to be the approach of a Yid to Torah. Mi Sinai, we have to follow the example of Sinai. Just like Sinai possessed the concept of modesty, Namich Mikol Torah, the lowest of all mountains, our same attitude has to be to Torah. And when does a Yid succeed in Torah? When his attitude is just like Moshe Kibel Torah Mi Sinai. Sinai goes along with Torah. The concept of Sinai is a guide and a madrich to us how we are to learn Torah. And that is why we look at Mishnah Tesvav, we find Shammai Yomer, the sage Shammai tells us, Asay teroscha kvar, amoy ma'at v'asay harbe, ve'v'mekabel es kol odom b'seiv uponim yofes. And you have to accept and greet everybody b'seiv uponim yofes, very warm and friendly. Who is the Tana that is saying this? Shammai. Shammai is known for being a very strict person. We know the Chazal tell us when the Gentile came to Shammai and asked him he should be a Megaya, what was Shammai's reaction? Dochvei ba'amas habinyan. He pushed him away. Shammai did not express any interest in that individual. Shammai here tells us, when it comes to Torah, you have to change your entire midas. You have to put aside your own characteristics, put aside your own nature. Shammai, who is the strict Shammai, he is the one that's demanding from us. When it comes to Torah, put away your own feelings, your own motives. You have to adjust yourself to Torah. And therefore, Shammai is the one that tells us, have a mekabelas kol adam. You have to greet each and every person. How? B'seiv uponim yofes, with an extreme amount of warmth and friendliness. And who is the one that tells us that? Shammai. In other words, Shammai says, it comes to Torah, put yourself totally on the side. Whether you are by nature not a friendly person or a friendly person doesn't make much of a difference. Comes to Torah, you have to be friendly to every person. B'mekabelas kol adam b'seiv uponim yofes. The Rashi in this week's Chazarah, in Parshas Kedoshim, I learned the Rashi in Kapitel Yutes, Pasuk Yud. The Torah here tells us about the mitzvah of Peyah. That at the edge of our fields, we are supposed to leave Peyah for the poor person. Then the Torah goes ahead, V'karmecha loisa oileil, uferet karmecha loisa lakeit, la'oni v'lager tazev oisam, it all has to be left for the poor. Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Rashi comments on the words Ani Hashem Elokeichem. Rashi says, Dayan lihipara. Elokim, we know, always reflects Midas Hadin. The Rebbe says, Dayan lihipara. He will be the one that will judge and take even. Ve'eni goyve mikem ela nefashos. Rashi says, the Kadosh Baruch Hu will punish, he will punish with nefashos, with the lives of people. Chas v'shalom. Shenema al tigzal dol. Don't steal from the poor. V'goymer. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. Rashi does not conclude the pasuk. Ki Hashem yoriv rivam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be the one that will fight their battle. Rabbi asked several questions. First of all, what is this Ani Hashem Elokeichem here? Every mitzvah we're commanded by the Rebbe. Why do we do all mitzvahs? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has commanded us to do them. Regardless whether the Torah says Ani Hashem Elokeichem at this specific mitzvah, the Torah doesn't. Why does Rashi get involved telling us what the punishment will be for the one who will not give the poor the payah or the peret karmecha? Rashi quotes a pasuk. Pasuk tells us, Al tigzal dol. Don't steal from the poor. The goyma. Nothing more than that. If we look into Parshas Devarim, in Parshas Devarim we find where the Torah tells us how a dayan is supposed to be honest when he paskins a din. The beginning of Parshas Devarim, Rashi also quotes this pasuk. But what does Rashi quote from the pasuk? The kava es koveim nefesh, where the pasuk says that a Kadosh Baruch Hu will let it out to the souls and lives of people. Here, Rashi tells us the punishment will be with the lives of people. Rashi brings a pasuk, does not spell out clearly the pasuk where the pasuk says that it will be let out to the lives of people. Rashi quotes the words al tigzal dol. Rashi does not quote the words v'kava es kaveim nefesh, which this is the real words of the pasuk where the pasuk says what the punishment will be, v'kava es kaveim nefesh. Rabbi is explaining here. We also have to understand why is it that the punishment will be such a sort of punishment. The person did not give payah, so what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu punish with the lives of people? We know that the system of Einshim Lamaila is in the format of Midah Keneged Midah. How is the Midah Keneged Midah for one not giving payah that Chas v'shalom with the lives? Rabbi explains, we're talking here about a poor person. And when the pasuk says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, the Elokeichem of whom? Of the people whom we're talking about in this mitzvah. In other words, we're talking about giving something to the poor person. There's the one who owns the field, and there's the poor person who has to be the recipient of the tzedakah. This is a kind of a tzedakah. Pasuk concludes, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. The Rebishter is the Elokeichem of the one who's supposed to give and the one who's supposed to take. Therefore, if one will lack and not give accordingly, and what are we talking about? A poor person whose life is dependent on this tzedakah which he's going to get here. We find in Parshas Vayikra where the pasuk talks about the korban which is brought by an man. There the pasuk tells us Rashi comments, as nafshay hu noisen. When a poor person gives away something, he's like giving away from his soul. He's like giving away from his life. The Rebbe says when we're talking about Peya min HaTorah has no shir. In other words, if one could leave over just one stick of tfuah, he will fulfill the mitzvah of Peya. So this is a person who did not even leave over this one stick of tfuah, which can be the lifesaver of the poor person's life. We're talking about a person who does not have anything of his own, and therefore his life is dependent on the pay, on the charity which he will be given from the people who will leave over something for them at the end of the field. The one who is not leaving this over is pegeya, he is affecting the nefashos of the poor person. Therefore the midah keneged midah is reflected in a way of nefashos. That is why the Torah says, "Eini goyvim mikem ela nefashos." Shenema al tigzal dol. What is the person doing here? He's doing wrong by bagazlaning the poor, the dol, the oraman, the poor. And such a gzela, which is really nothing huge. He's not even forgiving him this one stick of tfuah or the couple of grapes which are growing in his field. He's not even leaving that over for the poor. So Ani Hashem Elokeichem. There's no need for the Rabbeinu Shalom, for Rashi, to quote here the latter part of the pasuk, V'koves kaveim nefesh, because the child who's learning Chumash remembers what he's learned until now. Al tigzal dol, right? All Rashi quotes is from Mishlei, Al tigzal dol. We learned the pasuk before, V'hoyo ki yitzak alai, when the poor or the almana or the yisayimim will scream to HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'shamati, I will hear him, ki chanun ani, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he's full of chesed. What does the pasuk continue right after V'hoyo ki yitzak alai, V'shamati ki chanun ani? The pasuk continues that HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'chora api b'chem v'harakti yischa. So Mamela, there is no need for Rashi here to quote the latter part of the pasuk, v'koves kaveim nefesh. Rashi could only hint it with the word v'goyma, because being that we're talking here about a tigzal dol, one who's baraising, he's stealing from the poor. He's stealing from the poor. He's stealing from an oraman. He's stealing from a yosem, from a yisayim, from an almana. Here we refer. The child will immediately refer to the pasuk of v'hoyo ki yitzak alai v'shamati kichanun ani v'arakti. So therefore there is no need for Rashi here to get involved into these details of the pasuk, quoting also the words v'kovas kaveim nefesh. However, vaytam pashas dvarim, there the pasuk here is talking about something completely different. Pasuk there is talking about the need of a dayan to act properly bedin. Otherwise, there is also an einish of nefashas. This we do not know from the v'hoya ki yitzak alai. That's why Rashi has to quote the latter part of the pasuk there, or the pasuk in full there, latter part, v'koves kaveim nefesh, to stress that for that there is also a punishment of nefashas. B'negei the Zohar in this week's Sedre, there's a Zohar that tells us that Tanoim were going for a walk. And they came across how an individual damaged a tree, damaged a kerem, a tree of grapes. Then the next move was that a branch in the tree broke. Amar Rabbi Yosi, so Rabbi Yosi commented, Hayu diksiv, das is was steht, v'yiskadishtem v'yisam kedoshim. You will holy yourself and you will become holy. What shaykhs does this pasuk have to this incident? So the Rebbe says that the commentaries on the Zohar learn pshat, that what Rabbi Yosi wanted to express was that there's a concept of mitzvah gereres mitzvah and aveira gereres aveira. Just like we find v'hiskadishtem v'yisam kedoshim, you will become holy, you will become yet holier. That is the concept of mitzvah gereres mitzvah. There's another concept of aveira gereres aveira. One getting involved in breaking one part of the grape tree. Ultimately, the next step was that he broke another branch in the tree. So this is the concept of aveira gereres aveira. Rebbe says it's a Zohar which is totally ununderstood. We are talking about people in the caliber of Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chia, people who had smicha. Their titles were Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chia. Their smicha traced back Ish Mipiyish until Moshe Rabbeinu. So until this incident happened, Rabbi Yossi didn't know what the pasuk V'Kadishtem V'Yisem Kedoshim means. Now, he saw a fellow riding, and he broke off some grapes, and he broke branches. He says, it's a terrible thing. Avera gereres avera, mitzvah gereres mitzvah. Now I understand the pshat and the pasuk V'Kadishtem V'Yisem Kedoshim. Did Rabbi Yossi not understand the V'Kadishtem until then? The Rebbe is learning. We're talking about people, and the Rebbe says we find similar cases in many episodes related in Chazal and related in the Zohar, and the question arises, what's the pshat? Now we understand this pasuk. This pasuk, or another similar type of pasuk. Rebbe is learning, we're talking about people in the caliber of Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. They were walking in the streets. They really did not visualize things as grapes and branches and trees and physical damage. They didn't look at things that way. They looked at the world through psukim of Torah. To understand it in the language of David HaMelech. Rebbe brought the pasuk in Tehillim. There's a pasuk in Tehillim. Ki ere shemecha. When I look at the heavens, what do I look at? Ma'asetz beisecha. To David HaMelech says, to him it reflects the work of the fingers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He doesn't see a shamayim. He doesn't see a gashmi like a shamayim. He sees it. But what does it really mean to him? It's more meaningful than a gashmi like a shamayim. To him it means ma'asetz beisecha, the work of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The same thing when we're talking about people the caliber of Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. They were walking in the streets. They were looking to understand V'Kadishtem V'Yisem Kedoshim. What were they concerned with? Their concern was to understand V'Kadishtem V'Yisem Kedoshim. Therefore, they wanted to see it in one way, in another way, different spiritual levels, as they viewed Gashmiistic things which occurred in this world, which to them, all these inyanim had a Ruchniistic meaning. Therefore, when Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Chia saw the individual who traveled and created numerous kinds of damage to the grape tree, they didn't look at it as a damage to the grape tree. To them it was an interpretation of V'Kadishtem V'Yisem Kedoshim. And the same, all other Gashmiistic inyanim which people in this caliber see, to them they look at it as different expressions of Kedusha v'Kadosh Baruch Hu, Gadlus Hashem, understanding inyanim and Torah here, or understanding inyanim and Torah in different areas. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe mentioned that Beis Iyar, which is this week, the birthday of the Rebbe Maharash, the Rebbe refers to as L'Katchila HaRiber, is also the day when Tzira Agudas Chabad was founded. Many years ago, 28 or 30 years ago, the Rebbe Zalgazun founded the organization of Tzira Agudas Chabad, and it was on this day of Beis Iyar Teferes Shebeteferes. And it's on this day that when Tzach makes a special gathering, a special get-together, the Rebbe says he's mentioning it for an union of a bracha to the kinus, which will be taking place this week, and to all activities of the organization in general. And he says the organization is called Tzirei Agudas Chabad, Youngsters of Chabad. Though the organization keeps on aging, from year to year the organization gets older, however, the work that the organization has to do and accomplish, it has to be done with the lebedikite and with the energy of youngsters. And youngsters usually express much more energy than older people. And that is why the organization should remain with the name, and that should be the name of the organization, Tzirei Agudas Chabad, that all the work and Afatzas Hayadus and Afatzas Hamayonis which will be done, should be done with the enthusiasm and the vigor of youngsters and the lebedikite of youngsters, and the Rebbe benched it with a lot of bracha and hatzlacha. A good tavach.